Breaking news right now at 5. President Trump confirming Iran's supreme leader is dead after a joint attack by the U.S. and Israel. And it comes after Iran claimed its leaders were safe and sound. Within the last few minutes into our newsroom, President Trump posted a lengthy statement on social media, in part calling the supreme leader one of the most evil people in history. The president goes on to say, quote, "This is the single greatest chance for the Iranian people to take back their country." The U.S. Department of Defense posting this video of today's attack on social media. Central Command saying, quote, "Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime." Iran state media saying at least 200 people died in the attack. In retaliation, Iran unleashed strikes on U.S. military bases, Israel, and other targets across the Middle East, rocking heavily populated areas. A retaliation that President Trump acknowledged comes with a lot of risk and could lead to American deaths.
The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future.